Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes running fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Straight Shift. The inspiration for today's podcast comes from one of my clients and dear friends, Becca. And honestly, I probably should have done this topic a few months ago, but I wasn't thinking about it. And Becca reminded me that a lot of people are not driving as much because of this crazy COVID situation, whether they've been under full quarantine or stay-at-home directives, or they're just working from home now or staying at home to stay safe. The bottom line is people aren't driving as much as they used to. It was hilarious. My mom actually called me last week, so excited because she had just hit 100 miles on her trip odometer, which restarted about 3 months ago when the whole COVID situation started. So she's literally driven a little over 100 miles in about 3 months. Now, granted, she's retired. She doesn't drive maybe 3,000 miles a year under normal circumstances, but I think she is getting about 2 months to the gallon right now on her car. But a lot of people's cars have just been sitting. I have a client right now, I'm helping her sell a 95 Camaro Z28 convertible. That is a fun car, let me tell you. But the car's been sitting in storage for several years. So of course it wouldn't start, but we've discovered it has several fairly expensive issues because it wasn't stored properly in the first place. I don't think she ever really intended to store it, but it has just been sitting for so long. She hasn't used it, and as a result, there are some problems. So I thought today we would talk about what happens or what can happen to your car if it just sits for a few weeks or for a few months or even a few years. And if you plan to store your car, or just not drive it for a certain period of time because you're not going anywhere, or you are going on vacation or taking a longer trip and your car is going to sit at home without you for a while, what should you do to keep your car in good shape so that it will start up when you're ready to drive it again? The first thing that typically goes bad with a car that just sits for a period of time without being driven is the battery. We have in our, what I call fleet, 3 cars and a motorcycle currently, and one of those cars is just a backup car. Sometimes she's a track car, but we don't drive her very often. And yes, I refer to cars as female. I name all my cars. This car happens to be named Tracy, and she usually sits under a cover at my in-laws' house because we don't have room to store her at our house, and they have a big driveway, and they're really nice about letting us keep the car there. We also have a motorcycle that has not really been ridden in a couple of years, and as a result, we're getting ready to sell it because we just don't ride that much anymore, and it's not worth keeping at this point. But the battery on it is dead, so we're having to replace the battery and get that thing running again so that we can sell it. And you may think, okay, if a car's turned off, there's nothing running, why would the battery go dead? The car's not doing anything. Well, that's actually not true. Cars, especially modern cars, they still draw a small amount of power from the battery, even when they don't look like they're doing anything, when they're not turned on. And that's because they use this small draw of power to keep all of the car's computers and electrical systems alive, so to speak. They constantly need this little heartbeat, and they check on themselves and they check on each other to make sure everything is copacetic. And this small amount of draw can drain the battery if the battery is not being recharged on a regular basis by your alternator when you drive it. Plus, batteries also have just a natural self-discharge or an internal chemical leakage because every system has a certain amount of entropy. So even if your car is just not being driven, not doing anything, the battery will eventually die. That depends on how long your car has been sitting. If it's only been sitting for a few weeks, that battery may recover. You may just be able to call AAA or get out your jump box and jump it, drive it around for 20, 30 minutes, and the battery will come back. It's never going to come back completely because once the battery discharges fully, it never comes back to full life, but it may come back and be perfectly good for you for another year. Maggie, my Mini Cooper has an Odyssey battery in it because Odyssey has been a wonderful sponsor for years. And that's a different type of battery. It's designed to deep cycle. So Maggie can sit a little longer than normal cars and the battery will still be okay. But it also depends on the quality of battery that you have. The Odyssey batteries are a lot more expensive. It's a great battery, but it is more expensive. And a normal car battery, there are good ones and there are cheap ones. So it just depends on if you've got a good quality battery and how much life it had left in it when you started parking your car. If the battery was a few years old already, then it's not going to have as much juice stored up as if it were a new battery. It also depends on the conditions that you're storing your car. If it's really cold, like there's a lot of people who live up north who might have convertibles or fun cars that they drive when the weather is nice, but then they store those cars through the miserable winter months and drive a beater or an SUV or a truck to get through the snow. And any battery that is sitting in cold conditions does not like to start up. It will drain faster. It has to work harder. Anybody who's lived up north in the winter knows that you get up in the morning and you pray your car starts so you can heat it up and go to work. Now, if your stored car is, just going to sit for a few weeks, maybe, 2 or 3 weeks, you may be fine. But if you're going to store your car for longer than 3 or 4 weeks, you want to plan ahead. If you're just not driving it on a regular basis because it's a backup car or you're working from home or whatnot, just plan to drive it once every couple of weeks, maybe once a week. Just get out, drive. You can drive to nowhere, take the back roads, just have a little enjoyment, for 20 or 30 minutes. It'll get you out of the house, which is good for your sanity, but it's also good for your car and the battery. The alternator will charge it back up. Or if you're, say, going on a longer vacation, when I was in college, I drove my 85 Toyota Supra out to school out in California, and I just left it there. I didn't bring it back and forth to Wisconsin. When I came home every summer, I was able to store it at the home of some friends of our family that we'd known for many years, and they just drove it once every couple weeks. They would just take her out, drive her on the back roads. It really did not take a lot of arm twisting for them to take out my Toyota Supra on the back roads of Northern California, but they kept her in good shape for me while I was back home in between the years of college. So if you have a family member or trusted friend that can just start up your car and drive it around, maybe run errands in it one day a week, then that will keep your car in good shape. But, you have to trust that person with your car. So if you don't have that option, then I strongly recommend you get what's called a maintenance charger or trickle charger, which honestly is more fun to say. But a maintenance charger is just a low power 12-volt battery charger that is going to check the battery voltage every so often and just kind of top it off. Just give it that little trickle, which is why we call it a trickle charger. Imagine that. But it won't overcharge the battery like a regular battery charger will. It will just give it that little bit to replenish what your car is slowly but surely taking from it to keep its systems alive. And you can pick these up at your local parts stores or online for as little as like $25 for a good quality but simple one. Or you can spend $100 or so on a super fancy one that has a big screen and all these system diagnostic capabilities. But honestly, most people don't need that. Save your money, spend $25. And all you have to do is attach the little alligator clips that come on the cable, attach that to your battery terminals, follow the directions, follow all the safety precautions that they tell you to, and then you plug the trickle charger into the wall outlet, just your normal AC power outlet, and you're good to go, and it's going to keep that battery alive. It won't keep it alive indefinitely. Some of their marking materials say it will, but it won't, because again, every system has a certain amount of entropy, and it depends on the quality of the battery. For example, we had the motorcycle attached to a battery trickle charger, but it still died on us. But honestly, that was kind of a cheap battery. Motorcycle batteries are dang expensive, so we skimped a little bit the last time we put a new battery in it, and this battery just wasn't as good a quality even as we thought it was, and over a couple of years, even the trickle charger couldn't keep it alive. But I found that you can usually expect a trickle charger to extend the life of that battery for about 3 to 5 times longer than it would normally, so it can be a really good option. But what you don't want to necessarily do is disconnect the battery terminals if you're going to store your car. Years ago, before cars had all these complicated electrical and computer systems, that worked great. But now if you disconnect that, not only will you lose your radio station programming, inconvenient but not the end of the world, but it can confuse your car's systems and the computer so that when you do reconnect it or reinstall the battery, those systems may freak out a little bit, and you might have to take the car to the dealership and have them kind of recalibrate them and tell them it's okay, you got a battery again. So that can just add to your cost. So unless you're planning to store the car for several years, in which case, yeah, you're probably going to have to take the battery out. Otherwise, just get yourself a good trickle charger or somebody you trust to drive your car and not wreck it while you're gone. The next thing that tends to cause you problems when you store your car are the tires. If you've ever had your car sit for an extended period of time, or even if it's just sat, sometimes I can do it overnight. If it's really cold, you can develop flat spots on your tires, and then you go to drive your car and at best get a vibration, or you get this, boom, 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 as you're driving down the road and you can actually feel that flat spot on your tire. That's not a lot of fun. But that's because when you drive your car, the tires heat up due to the friction with the road. And the rubber compounds that it's made from, they're designed to heat up and get warm and have some flexibility and movement to them. But then when you park the car, the tires cool down, and where the weight of the car is sitting on the tire, between the tire and the road, a flat spot to a certain degree naturally develops. If your tires are properly inflated and you're driving it on a regular basis, you're never going to notice that because the tires will heat up again quickly and they'll go back to being perfectly round, and you will never notice that there was this little bitty flat spot on them. But if the car sits for an extended period of time and the tires cool and sit with the weight of the car on the tires, especially if they're not fully and properly inflated, then that flat spot not only can become much more noticeable, but can actually become permanent, and you're going to have to get yourself 4 new tires. So if you want to avoid flat spots, if your car is going to be sitting for an extended period of time, first of all, make sure it has the right air pressure in it in the first place. You should be doing that no matter what, because it's always bad not to have enough air in your tires. But that will also keep them from developing a significant flat spot. You should also clean out your car. Don't store it with a whole bunch of crap in it that's going to increase the amount of weight that is sitting on said tires and therefore would create a bigger flat spot. The best thing to do, especially if you're going to be storing the car longer term, is just put the car up on 4 jack stands, and that's going to take the pressure off of the tires entirely, and they will stay nice and round. If you're not going to put it up on jack stands, if you're just going to park the car for a period of time, don't use the parking brake. That tends to be more for those of us that have 3-pedal cars, because we need that parking brake because we don't have a parking gear. But even with an automatic car, I tend to park it by putting it in neutral, putting on the parking brake, and then putting it in park so that the weight of the car is sitting on the brakes and not sitting on the engine mounts. But you don't want to do that if it's going to be parked long term, because the brake pads will be in contact with the rotors for way too long, and that can cause damage to them. If it's a really long period of time, it can even fuse them together, and then you got big problems. So put the car up on jack stands, but otherwise, if you park it on the ground, make sure the tires are properly inflated, and use some wheel chocks behind the wheels to make sure, just for extra safety, that the car doesn't roll, even if you have it in the park gear. All right, I'm going to take a really quick break, and when we're going to come back, we're going to talk about what fluids may or may not go bad while your car is being stored and how to prevent that. And then we're going to talk about critters, because we got to talk about critters if you're going to store your car. Be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of, or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Nice to meet you. Love your asphalt.
Hey, nice treads.
It's Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift. We are talking about what happens if your car sits for a period of time, if you're not driving it, or if you need to intentionally store your car for an extended period of time. People ask me all the time, do fluids in your car just go bad with time? Not necessarily because you've been driving it and heat cycling them, but if your car just sits, will the fluids go bad? The answer is some of them can, yes. If they're not circulating through the car's various systems on a regular basis like they're supposed to do, they can get icky, they can go bad due to moisture buildup. Now, motor oil, for example, does not tend to go bad over time, especially the good synthetics, and that's because oil does not attract moisture. Water and oil, they don't mix, so you don't tend to get moisture in the oil. And this is also why the old kind of rule of when to change your oil every 3,000 miles or every 3 months was kind of BS, because if you weren't driving your car a lot, like again, my mom drives her car under normal circumstances about 3,000 miles a year. We put a good synthetic oil in it that can go 7,000. So we change mom's oil about every 2 years. The reason that they used to tell you, and really will still tell you, to do it every X number of months or however many thousand miles is because they want to get you into the shop. They need your regular business. They need to make money, but it also, you want to check over your car, and most people don't have their car looked over for any safety issues unless they bring it in for an oil change. So with mom, we do check her car on a fairly regular basis since we only change the oil every 2 years. Maggie, we change oil usually once a year because I only drive about 7,000 miles a year under normal circumstances too. This is why oil does not go bad on its own over time. But a lot of other fluids can. Brake fluid is the most notorious one. Brake fluid loves moisture. It is what is called hygroscopic. Big word, but it basically means that it will absorb water like a sponge. And so this is why brake fluid, if your car does sit, you need to be sure to change that brake fluid and put fresh fluid in before you go and drive your car, because it has absorbed all the moisture from the air, especially if you live in a humid climate like we do here in the Carolinas, and it will get that moisture in it. And what you'll feel is if you go to drive the car, you're going to have a very squishy brake pedal. Squishy brake pedals are not good. So brake fluid is one that can definitely go bad over time. Other fluids in your car, like transmission fluid and power steering fluid, coolant, those can go bad depending on the condition they were in when you stopped using your car or put it into storage, how much moisture they've absorbed, and whether or not the car was full, the fluids were topped off. So if you plan to store your car long term, especially if you're going to store it for a few years, then it may be a good idea to have all the fluids drained, obviously, once the car is parked in its storage location. Or you can put all fresh fluids into the car and make sure they are topped off. The reservoirs are as full as they can possibly be, and that prevents moisture from accumulating because there's no more space in there for the moisture to get into. The proper fluid is taking up all the space it can in its reservoir and in the lines. This will also help the seals and gaskets from drying out as well. This is especially true for gas. Gas can definitely go bad if it's not stored properly. And this can be a very, very expensive repair. This is what's happened exactly to my client's beautiful Z28 convertible. She really didn't intentionally put it into storage for long term. It just she just stopped using it, and life happened, and it ended up sitting for several years. And of course, when we went to start it up, it wouldn't start. And even though we put a fresh battery in it, it wouldn't start. It would not crank over. And so I had a feeling that the gas had gone bad. So we had it towed over to a mechanic up on the north side of Charlotte that I really, really trust. And sure enough, they pulled the gas tank. They have to do what's called dropping the tank, which basically means removing the gas tank from your car. And depending on the vehicle, that can range from mildly inconvenient to a royal pain in the ass. And on the Z28 convertibles, it's a royal pain in the ass because the gas tank is sitting on top of the rear axle, gives you lots of trunk space. They figure, hey, nobody's really going to need to drop a tank. Right. So when they dropped the tank and drained the old gas out, it looked like swamp water. It was so disgusting. So, not only is this expensive to do, but the mechanic really doesn't want to do this. It's a very disgusting job. They don a hazmat suit, drain all that bad gas out, have to dispose of it properly, and then they've got to thoroughly clean your gas tank. But here's the real problem. Your fuel pump sits in the bottom of your gas tank, and if it sits in swamp water, you can imagine how unhappy it's going to be. So you end up getting to buy a new fuel pump. And furthermore, your fuel injectors are likely to be all gummed up as well. Gummed up is a very technical term in the industry. And you may be able to salvage those by running a good injection cleaner through them, but just depending, they may or may not be salvageable. So now you may also be paying for some more injectors. So the best thing to do is either, if you're going to be storing it long term, either completely drain the gas tank out, make sure it's empty, or completely fill it up with brand new fresh gas and add a fuel stabilizer that's going to prevent ethanol buildup. It will keep the gas from deteriorating, usually for up to a year. So it's a kind of medium storage solution. But if the car is going to be stored long term, the best thing is to have somebody who knows what they're doing completely drain the gas tank once it's in its permanent storage area. The other thing that you have to worry about that's not entirely under your control when your car sits are critters. Storing your car in your garage is great because it protects it from the elements. It's I wouldn't say climate controlled environment. Some people's garages are climate controlled. Mine obviously is not, but it still keeps your car relatively warm in the winter, slightly cooler in the summer. But it does the same thing for the critters, which is why they like to hang out in your garage. And so those fuzzy little squatters will move in and turn your vehicle into a housing development for them and their family and all their fuzzy little friends. And they're going to chew up your wires and dig into your upholstery and use the parts of your car to build their little homes. So you want to try to keep them out of your car as best as possible, and that involves covering any of the gaps where they could enter. So even if your car is being stored inside in a garage, you still want to put a good cover on it that fits your car. It's designed for your car, not necessarily a generic one size fits most. Get one that's really designed for your car so it fits snugly. Get it tucked up in there in the wheel wells. Put some steel wool. Steel wool is great for this. In the exhaust pipe, around the air intake. Just try to plug all the holes where these obnoxious little rodents can worm their way in and take over. You can also spread like mothballs or cotton balls dipped in peppermint essential oil around the perimeter of your vehicle because rodents really hate the smell of peppermint. So do spiders, by the way. The problem with that is the oil will eventually evaporate. And so you really kind of need to re-soak them every week. And that might not be realistic for you. So you may have to take some more aggressive measures and bust out the mouse traps and even some rat poisoning. And I really hate that. I don't like to kill them. I just want to keep them out of my car. But you have to decide what level of warfare you need to engage in. But don't be surprised if they outsmart you. My neighbor Bob has this beautiful older Corvette that he keeps in his garage, and he doesn't drive it all the time. So he does keep it under a nice top, cover in his garage, but we have rodents in our garages here. So he's been putting out the mouse traps with peanut butter on them. But those little buggers are smarter than we are. And somehow they are managing to eat all the peanut butter without triggering the traps. So he is considering moving to a more aggressive form of chemical warfare against them to keep them out of his Corvette. So good luck with that battle. If you have a really expensive car, maybe it's really valuable, maybe it's just really valuable to you because it means something to you, it's been in your family a long time, and you plan to store it long term, it may be worth spending, $100 to $200 a month on a really nice climate-controlled indoor storage room for the car at a professional storage facility that has preventative measures to keep critters out, and your car will be in a nice climate-controlled environment. It's up to you. One thing you need to do is be sure to keep up the insurance. So many people are tempted to cancel their car insurance while the car is in storage long term, but that could come back to seriously bite you in the butt. You want the vehicle to still be covered just in case anything happens to it while it is still in storage. Somebody could, in theory, break in and steal it. The building could burn down. Somebody could crash into it. They could crash through your garage, or you or your spouse or your teenager could accidentally drive your other vehicle into it if you're sharing garage space. Anything can happen. So you want to keep at least a certain amount of coverage on the vehicle. Plus, if you let the insurance lapse and then you try to put insurance back on the vehicle when you're ready to drive it again, your insurance company might jack up your rates. And it will also make it more difficult for you to renew the registration on the vehicle if there's been a lapse in insurance. DMVs don't like that. So check with your DMV. A lot of the time, if you're going to store a car, they can give you a certain type of registration that means that the vehicle is in storage. It's not being driven on the road, and you can't legally drive it on the road, but it kind of puts it in a pause status in their system so that they don't ding you for it when you go to re-up the full registration and plate for it. And talk to your insurance agent and just see what your options are. A lot of insurance companies will have slightly cheaper rates if it's a vehicle you don't drive on a regular basis, or if it's one that is in storage and plans to be in storage for a few years. So you're not going to get completely reamed on your insurance. Now, what do you do when you're finally ready to get this car back out of storage and out on the road again? You should go through a checklist. And basically, you are undoing all of these things that you did to put it into storage in the first place. Starting with checking under the cover to see if the rodents managed to move in anyway. Pull all the material and pull that steel wool out of the exhaust, out of your intake, whatever measures you took to try to keep them out. But still, check for chewed belts, chewed hoses, chewed wires. They chew everything. Look for nests. You may have to, look underneath the seats, see if there are any holes in the carpet. Look for their little pellets of droppings that they may have left in your car. Yuck. But make sure that any evidence of critters is removed and taken care of. Check your windshield wipers. I didn't mention that before, but the rubber on the windshield wipers, any rubber wears out over time. It dries out, it gets brittle, it cracks. So you may need to put new windshield wipers on the car. And of course, check the tires. Inflate them, make sure the pressures are where they're supposed to be, and then check around the tires, both on the sidewalls and in the treads, for any signs of cracks or dry rot. Check the brakes. Very likely rust will have accumulated, at least a light surface rust on the rotors. That's practically unavoidable, and in most cases, it will go away after you drive the vehicle for a short time, after a few days or a week. But also check the condition of the brake fluid, because again, I said that's the one that absorbs water like a sponge, so you will likely, unless you drain that fluid before you stored it, you're going to need to do a brake flush and put nice new fluid in it. And then go ahead and check all the other fluids in the car. Make sure there's no leaks. If you drained all the fluids, be sure to put all the fluids back in before you try to start up the car, and make sure the condition is good, the levels are good, and the car is ready to go. If you took the battery out, put it back in, make sure it's reinstalled and reconnected properly. Make sure the battery terminals are clean, that there's no corrosion on them that could have happened while the car was in storage. And of course, the best thing is to make sure you just put in a fresh, brand new battery. And then wash the car. It's been sitting, even it's been in a climate controlled area, it has probably not been hermetically sealed in a clean room. So it will be dirty. Give your car a nice bath inside and out. Get a good detail guy to come out or bring it to a good detail person to get it in beautiful shape again. And of course, if you drain the gas tank, make sure you fill it up with fresh gas. Check the gas, make sure it's good. She should crank up if you've stored it properly, and then you can get back on the road. I hope this has been helpful for you, whether you're storing your car long term or if you just got a car that's been sitting for a while because you haven't gone anywhere trying to avoid the coronavirus situation, or maybe your situation's changed. Now you're retired or you're working from home and you just don't drive as much as you used to. Be sure that you are taking the steps necessary to keep your car in good shape, even if you are no longer driving a bazillion miles a year. Be safe out there, folks. Drive safely. Watch out for idiots. Take care of your car. I'm out of here.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.